Okay, in this video we're going to briefly go over the basic data types in JavaScript. There are three primitive data types, meaning the simplest type of data you can have used in JavaScript, and then there are two collection-based data types that we're going to talk about. Okay, so there are more data types than this, but these are the basics, and these are the ones that you'll use for 95% or more of your JavaScript experience. Okay, so the first one is the number data type. So we're going to create a new file here, and we're just going to call this number.js. We're going to explore this data type. So number in JavaScript is any token in your code that is a series of numeric characters. You can have one decimal point, and you can have numeric characters afterwards. Okay, so numbers, most programming languages make a distinction between integers and floating point decimals. JavaScript does not. They're all just considered type number. Okay, so we can see that using console.log. So let's take a look at the type of the number 5. Okay, so type of is a keyword that gives you the type of the item that follows after. Okay, so here, this is the literal value 5. Now, this is called a literal value. You might hear that when people talk about computer science. A literal value is something that you have literally typed into your code. Okay, so it's not a variable, it's a literal value that you have typed. So type of, again, acts sort of like a function, but it's not. It is a keyword. Okay, and then the thing you provide it after the keyword is the thing you want to check the type of. All right, so what is the type of 5? And we can go to our terminal and run node and then number.js, and we see this is type number. Right? So this is sort of acting like a function. It's returning some sort of value. What is the type of the thing that's being returned? All right, so we have type of. Right? So this is returning something, and we printed it to the terminal and it said number, but what is the type of that thing? String. Okay, so you can see this a little bit more clearly. I'll open another terminal here and we'll run node in interactive mode, and we will see type of 5. And here it displays the value in quotes. So very clearly we see that this is actually returning the string that contains the characters saying number, right? So type of returns a string. So we have type of 5, type of any sort of decimal, right? So any of our values. Now if we have the type of some string, so this is some series of string characters, right? The type of this data is string, and again type of returns that as a string. All right. What other data? The third main type of data is Boolean data, right? So that is going to be either a true or a false, right? Boolean has two types, or two values. It's either true or it's false. So the type of those things is Boolean. So these are the three basic types of data. And so for each one of these, we're going to briefly go over some of the operators that you can use, and we're going to show use of the type of, and then we're eventually going to go into collections. All right, so back here we have type of 5, type of 49.7. Right, these are both treated the same in JavaScript. It's the same type of data. In most other programming languages, you'll have a separate data type for integer data and floating point decimal data. All right. So what can we do with these types of values? Right, basic arithmetic. Right, so we can console.log add. So I could have 1 plus 2. We can multiply. This would be 4 times 2. We can divide. 12 divided by 2. And subtract, of course. 4 minus 1. this up here higher. So we have addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. Those are the basics, right? So add. Now you might want to implement this style when you're trying to display things. So add, what are we adding? This is 1 plus 2, and then the result, and then this is going to be printed to the terminal, and then because I have a comma here in console.log, it's going to print an extra space, and then it's going to convert this argument to a string after it's evaluated. So this is going to become, this expression will get evaluated to the number 3, and then that will be converted to a string and then concatenated. All right, so we're going to use this sort of style a lot, where you have a string label and then the next argument in console.log is going to be the actual value that you're looking at. So here this is subtraction, and that's 4 minus 1 equals multiplication, 4 times 2 equals, and division. So divide by 2. Let's divide by something that doesn't divide evenly also. So divided by 5 here. Alright, so let's take a look at these. We're going to run our program again and see what the results are. Most of them will be pretty obvious. The equal sign instead of colon, but that wasn't the error. The error was I didn't have a comma. Right? So console.log takes arguments. This is one expression, and if I don't have this comma here, there's no operator between this data and that data, so that's why there was an error. If I have the comma there, then that means this is the first argument and this is a separate argument. Okay, so following these error messages are very important. It's really nice. Node points you at, it prints out the line, it tells you what line number it is, prints out the line, and sometimes even includes these errors showing you it's something to do with this, right? So it's a syntax error, and it tries to guess what the issue is. It doesn't always get it right, but it's trying to make an educated guess on bad data, right? So pay attention to those errors and actually read them. Don't just skip over them when they happen. All right, so now we can run this. All right, and we see division can result if it divides evenly in just an integer style, but this is still a number. And then 12 divided by 5, which does not divide evenly, we see it turns into the decimal value there. Right? Up here we might as well label these properly too. We have type of 5, and that equals, and here we have okay, so in I'm using the Atom text editor, and you can highlight some code and hit shift quotation mark, and it will surround that highlighted code with quotation marks and make it a string. So that's kind of nice. Most modern text editors have some nice features like that. And you'll see me sort of do some things like this. Control-Shift-D duplicates a line of code, and then Control down or up moves it up or down, so I can move this up or down. So it's really nice. I recommend using a modern type of text editor. Alright, so these are some basic arithmetic operations you can do. Obviously, you can use grouping symbols. So if I wanted to have something more complicated, whatever's in the grouping symbols gets evaluated first. But also we have an entire set of tools with this math object. So I'm on developer.mozilla.org, and this is an excellent place to learn about web development, JavaScript, HTML, and CSS specifically. So this math object, and it is capitalized, it's a global object, so I can just reference it directly. So in my code, I can say things like console.log, and I'm going to log out math.floor of 2.4. So this is just a string value. It's the label, right? Just so when we run the program, we know what's going on. So these were our labels, right? So we know what the actual expression being evaluated is, and we see 4 minus 1 does equal 3. Now, the second argument is the actual expression. So same here, this is the actual expression, which is a function call. The function call takes in one argument, 2.4, and math.floor just takes the floor of the number. So if it's 2.4, this is going to be 2. And there's the opposite of that, which is math.ceiling. Alright, so we can do math.ceiling. Oops. We can take a look at these two. Alright, so we see the floor of 2.4 is the integer value directly below, if you basically just strip off the decimal values. The ceiling is the opposite. If you, whatever the decimal value is, we assume we're going to round up, basically. Now it's important to look at this in terms of negatives as well. If I had negative 2.4, the floor is always less, right? So it's not quite like rounding. Okay, so the floor of negative 2.4, you're not just stripping off the decimal values, you're actually going lower, right? So floor means go down and take the nearest integer down. So that's negative 3. Ceiling means go up, take the nearest integer up, which if you're going up from negative 2.4, negative 2 is greater than negative 2.4, right? So you're going up. Let's floor and ceiling. We have console.log round round 4. Copy and paste. So make sure you know your copy and paste. It can be really useful to navigate around your code, copy and pasting. It can be a little bit dangerous too if you have a typo though, and when you paste, that typo gets pasted over. So be careful with it, but it's a good tool. All right, save our file. We can run this. All right, so we can round to 2.4. Right, so the decimal point is below 5, and if we go 2.5, we'll see this will round up. Alright, math.round 2.5, that rounded up to 3. Alright, what else interesting can we do? We can take a look at this, and you can see there's lots of good stuff. Right, so you have static properties, which are basically constants. Euler's constant. Natural logarithms, pi is very useful, math.pi, square root of 2. So these are just properties attached to the math object that have static values stored on them, right? But there's also these methods, and these methods are basically just functions. Method is another word for function that's attached to an object. So if this object has a function attached to it, that's often called a method. So here we have an absolute value that will return, if you have a negative value, that will return the positive version of that value, right? So we can test that one out. And we'll take the absolute value of 23.5. Right, and we'll see what this is, and always have your semicolons at the end. Right, so the absolute value just removes the negative, right? But if we have a positive number, it just keeps it positive. Okay, so we'll see what the value is here. Absolute value. All right. And then one other one that's really sort of fun to work with is console.log. We're going to do math.random. Okay, and this function basically returns a pseudo-random number, floating point decimal between 0 and 1. All right, so if we run this, this time it randomly generated the number 0.02 and this whole thing, right? But each time we run the program, this is going to be a new random number. So math.random. Okay, we see it changed. And every time we run this program, it changes. So random is one of those things that's fun to use if you're making games, if you're going to do a coin flip program, or if you're going to do paper, rock, scissors. Any sort of game is going to have some aspect of randomality to it. It's important to know that this is not true random data. This is what's called pseudo-random data. That's a little bit outside the scope of this course, but just know that this function with the right tools can be predictable, not actually random. That's what it means to be pseudo-random. And so that has implications in things like cryptography, where the strength of the random number is very, very important. Okay, so you would never use math.random for any type of cryptography, but it's perfectly acceptable for simple games and things like that. Okay, so this is the data type number. You can look into more of the math functions on your own. Again, developer.mozilla.org. There's a lot of good stuff in there. All right, so that's stuff that we all pretty much knew already. Let's take a look at the string data type. Okay, so we're going to look at string.js. We're going to do some of the same things here. We're going to say console.log, and we're going to look at type of, and then okay, now look at how I did this. This is just my label, right? I have a label here that's surrounded in double quotes, but I want the quotes to be inside of the string. So I have to escape that with the backslash. Otherwise, if I don't escape the quote, JavaScript starts parsing this and it sees a quotation mark and says, okay, everything here on is character data. That's what a string is. It's a string of characters. And then when it encounters the other quotation mark, it says, okay, we're done signifying string data, right? But that's not actually what we want. I want to say no, that this quotation mark should be included as a character in my string. So that's why we have this backslash. That's called the escape character. Okay, so type of, and then I want these quotation marks to be included. So these two characters together in code will result in just one character in the actual string, and that one character is the quotation mark, right? And then here's the final closing quotation mark that is saying, okay, I am done creating a string. So this entire thing is what's called a string literal, because I've literally typed the characters in quotation marks in my code. It's a string literal. All right, so that is the label, and I want to see what happens when I say type of some string. All right, we can run this. This is going to be node and string.js. So the type of some string is string. So anything you pass to type of, it tells you what type it is. And we have the three primary primitive types, which is number, string, and Boolean, and we're going to get to Boolean next. And then we also have the collection types, which we'll get into next, after Boolean. All right, so what can we do with strings? The most important thing that we need to know how to do with strings is concatenation, right? So I can join two things together. I can console.log and join hello, comma, and I can join that with a name like Bob or something, right? And I can join that with more characters. All right, so if we see here, this string is being designated in JavaScript code. So we have the double quotes. You could also use single quotes to designate a string, just like this, right? And what's inside is the actual character data. All right, so we have HELLO, comma, and we probably also want to include white space. So white space is a character. That's important to know. So when we're talking about string data and we want to print something out, we have to include that white space. And then we will add that, or concatenate, which means basically just combine them. We're going to add the name Bob, and then we're going to add an exclamation point. All right. There's a semicolon in there. And we run this. So we see that those characters are actually displayed, including the white space. and then Bob. Now another thing to note is we could have a variable holding the name. So I can make a variable, let name, let declares the variable, and I can assign it with the single equals. Okay, so assignment is the single equals. When you have a variable or an identifier on the left-hand side, then the value is going to be on the right-hand side. So here I can put Bob as the string. Make that capital again. And then down here, instead of Bob, I can just have name. Okay, so this is a string expression. We are concatenating multiple things. This is a string literal because I've literally typed the data. This is a variable holding a string. And then this is another string literal, and we're concatenating all those together. I can, if I have a value, a numeric value that I want to add to this string, JavaScript does something called type coercion, which we're going to go into in more detail later, but it will automatically convert any numeric value to a string if you concatenate it with a string. Okay, so let's say we'll say Bob's age is 21, and we'll say is age space years old. We'll include that exclamation mark. So let's step back and take a look. Here's a string literal with a space. Then we should concatenate our variable, whatever's stored in our variable Bob, right? So that should say hello space Bob, comma, right? Because we're concatenating it with this, and then comma is 21 years old, right? So here is. This is a number though, and JavaScript's automatically going to convert that to a string because that's the only thing that makes sense. If I'm adding something to a string, I can't convert this to a number to do arithmetic. So the only thing that actually makes sense is to make age a string. And so JavaScript is sort of intelligent in that respect, and it will automatically convert numbers to strings when you have them with concatenation here. All right, so let's say. We'll say you are. Alright, so let's see what this looks like when we run it. Hello Bob, you are 21 years old, exclamation point. So you see that this is character data. Alright, so another way of doing this, which is a little bit nicer, you see how we have all of these plus concatenation operators here, and then we have lots of different quotation marks, single quotes, double quotes, and it looks a little bit messy. So there's actually a fairly recent addition to JavaScript that allows us to do string interpolation, which is sort of like a format string in Python if you're familiar with Python, but it lets us basically inject variables into a string without having all of these beginning and ending quotation marks and these concatenation operators. So this is we'll make a little comma here. This is string concatenation, and then this is string interpolation or format strings. And the way you make a format string is with the backtick character. Okay, so console.log. And so I'm going to have two backticks. The backtick character is to the left of your numeric 1 key. It's up from the tab key, right? And so those are going to be your quotation or your string delimiters, right? So double quotes and single quotes are normally thought of as the string delimiters. With string interpolation, we use backticks, and we basically just type out our message, hello, comma, space. But now if I want to inject one of these variables, I use $, and then left curly bracket, right curly bracket. And what I put in here is just any JavaScript expression. So usually we want to just use a variable name, because if you have too many expressions it gets messy, right? So here we're just going to say name, and that's going to take name, whatever's stored currently stored in that variable at this point in the code, and it's going to inject it and replace this part with whatever's stored there, which will be Bob. So it says hello name and then space you are space, and then we want our age in there. And again, this is going to automatically convert whatever it is to a string. Right? Age, years old. Okay, so we see that this is a little cleaner, right? This looks, it's more obvious what's going on. Here we have all these extra quotation marks. It's easy to miss the white space. You could potentially, have something like that, where sometimes there's white space after the operator or not, and it looks a little bit messy. Okay, so this can be a little bit hard to read. So we're going to use this style mostly. A lot of the time we're going to use string interpolation using the backtick character. All right, so we can run this. Oops. And we see that it matches. Right, so that's good. What other things can you do with strings? You can reference by index. So if I have a string, let s equal a, b, c, d, e, f, g, console.log, character at index, and I might make this the interpolation at index. And I'm going to pick some index. We'll say that's at index 4 is, there we go, I can get that typed out right. So what I want to do is I want to take this string and I can reference a character by some index number. The very first index number is 0. This is index 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, so indexing always starts at 0. So the first item has index 0. The second item has index 1. The third is index 2. All right, so it's always one less than we're sort of used to counting things. If this is the first item, it's one less than that, which would be 0. The second item, it's one less, it's 1. All right, so the index 4, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, that's E. So S, and I can look at the item at index. I can just put in a 4 here, right? So this is my string S, and I'm referencing the square brackets. Let me reference one of the items in it. So the character index 4 is E. Now let's say I want to add some quotation marks around this E to make it clear. So I can just put a quotation mark here, and I don't have to escape it this time because I'm using a different string delimiter. At the very beginning I used a different string delimiter, so I don't have to do a backslash here. I can, but I don't have to. There's no reason to. All right, and so this should put the E in quotes. All right, and just for a little bit more clarity, let me call this instead of S, I'm going to call this my string, just so we don't get confused. It's good to use good names. My string, and we're going to pass in the character 4. So this is the same for list data, which we're going to talk about coming up. All right, so you use reference by index with lists as well, but you reference the identifier of your data, right? So in this case, it's the string name. And we don't have to reference an identifier. It could be a string literal as well. We could do something like this. We have a string literal here, and this means get the 4th indexed item. Right? So here we have a string identifier, my string, and we want to grab the 4th item. Now instead of having a 4, a literal integer 4, right? We've actually literally typed in the number 4 here. We could use a variable, index. Right? So index 4 is the character E. Now if we change this, because we abstracted this away, we didn't use static values here. If I used a static value, Static meaning I can't change it easily. I would have to change the actual literal. If I run this, index 5 is F. But if I want to change it to 2, I have to change it in 2 different places, right? Which is why it's better to use a variable, because then I only have to change it in one place. So if I use the variable index instead of a literal here, then I won't have to change it in 2 places anymore. I can just change it here. So I want to look at the index, the fourth, the item at the fourth index, the character in the string at index 4. Alright, my screen glitched out a little bit there. Let's fix that real quick. Pop back. Hopefully that didn't mess anything up too badly. Index 4. Alright, and now if we run this, we see 4 is E, and I can easily just change this in one spot. I can look at the item at index 1, that's B. Alright, so that idea of storing a value in a variable and reusing the variable so you only have to change it in one place is very powerful, so make sure you're aware of that and you're thinking about that as you code things. So those are the primary tools you're going to need for strings. There's a whole lot more, but we'll go more in depth on strings at another time. And then finally I want to go into Boolean data. So we're going to make a new file called boolean.js. And Boolean data is core to all of programmatic flow. Alright, so Boolean data has 2 values. It has true or false. So I can have a variable bool1 and I can set that equal to true and let another bool set that equal to false. So we'll call this a bool and another bool. Okay, but these are the only 2 values. So when we think about storing this data, there are just 2 values. I could store this in a bit, right? Either a 0 or a 1. A bit is a binary digit, and it's when we talk about, you know, data storage, how many bits do you have, how many bytes do you have, kilobytes, megabytes, that sort of thing. So storage of a Boolean flag is very simple. It's just 1 bit. However, it's also very powerful. It's the power of choice. So if we can have an if statement which says if something is true, so if a bool, some variable is holding the value true, run some code. Otherwise, run some other code. So it's basically a way to make decisions, right? So oops, forgot my other one there. All right. So first, what is the type of console.log? The type of this data. And now that we know our formatting strings, we're going to use those more. We can say type of true. In here, we'll put type of true. And we can run this. I misspelled that. Type of. We can run this. We need to run Boolean. Okay, so type of true is Boolean, right? So the type of will always tell you the type of the thing that you pass it, if it's a variable or otherwise. So here I can pass in the variable type of a bool, right? Type of a bool. So a bool is just my variable. And we can print that out. Okay, so what can I do with these? You can join them together using Boolean Algebra. There's lots of different operations. The main operation you need to be aware of is, well, the main three operations is the not, so the not operator, and that is the exclamation point, and so whatever the value a bool is holding, it inverts it. So we know a bool is holding the value true, so not a bool is the opposite, so that will turn it into a false. Right, so not, so this is not a bool. Right, but we know it's set to true, so a bool by itself is true. We also have the AND operator and the OR operator, which we'll go into in detail, but the OR operator is, it takes two Boolean values, and it is only false when both of them are false. Okay, and so there's console.log, there's sort of a way we can display this. So the OR operator is the two pipes. The pipe character is, it's the backslash key, but you have to hit shift backslash. That's right above your enter key. So the OR operator is false only when both values are false. So here we have true or, let's do false and or false. False or false. False or true. True or false, and then true or true. So this is every possibility, right? There's two options. This first one can be false, and if it's first one's false, then the second one can be false or true. Right? If the first one is true, then the second one can be false or true. Right? So this is every possibility, and we'll see that the result of the OR operator is only false when the other two operands are false. Alright, so this is the only one that's false, false or false. And we can do something like this. We can say we can label it, might as well make it nice. And it's good to get used to doing some of this labeling, because you do it all the time, right? So it seems a little bit tedious, but get used to the keystrokes, get used to copying and pasting. Copy and paste that. But get used to using the keyboard. It's a tool you're going to use all the time, so get used to, just take your time with it and don't get frustrated about how long it takes, because you'll get better and better at it. Alright, so we'll have a little console.log at the top and say this is Boolean OR. Okay, so this is Boolean or false is false. But if there's true on any one of them, then it's true. So even if they're both true, then the result is true. And then the last one that you should be most familiar with, out of these three, right? There's three that you need to be most familiar with. The not operator inverts, right? The or operator is false only when both values are false. And then the and operator, that. So the AND operator is actually two ampersands. That is, if you hit Shift 7, the AND operator, right? Try to keep things consistent, right? The AND operator is true only when both values are true. Okay, so in a way, it's sort of the opposite of the OR, right? It's not exactly the opposite, but it's only true when both values are true. All right, so if we remove these OR operators, this is Boolean AND. Change all of these. Now, something like this, to save time, I have just copied and pasted the OR, and what we can do is use the functionality of the text editor. I'm going to hit Control F and find any instances of double pipes, and I'm going to replace them with double ampersands. Okay, so this is a nice tip to help you go through find and replace. So I click find. Every time I click find, we see it highlights a different one of these items, but I could also hit replace and it will replace it. So if I click up here, move my cursor, find, replace, 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 replace. Then it goes back up to the top. Now we want to be careful because we do want to be OR, right? So anyway, find and replace is a very useful tool. So there's an example of that. This is Boolean AND. And again, Boolean AND is only true when they're both true. So let's see what this looks like. Boolean AND, false and false is false. So if there's any false in it, it's going to be false. Here's a false, so that should be false. But there's no falses in this one, so it's going to be true. Right? And it makes sense because this is true and that is true, then they're both true. With OR, it's different. If this is true or that is true, and they can both be true, then it's true, right? That's why they're called AND and OR, because it makes sense in terms of the English language, right? All right, those are Boolean values, and in the next video we'll get on to collections. Just remember, numbers are combined. There are integers and decimal points. You can use type of to determine the type of data that you're dealing with. Basic operators, the math object has lots of functionality on it, so keep an eye on that. Strings, there's a lot more we can do with strings, but these are the basic things. String concatenation, escape characters, the backslash, concatenating with the plus sign, right? But then we also have string interpolation, right, with the format strings. We're using backticks, so this is really nice. We're going to use that a lot. And then you can reference individual characters by index, right, and that's using the square bracket notation. So your string identifier here, or it can be a string literal, and then you use square brackets, and an index number goes in the square brackets. Oh, one more thing to add with strings is the length of the string that comes in. You're going to need that all the time. So the length of a string. So if I want to know the length of a string, I say my string dot length. Okay, so this will be my string dot length. All right, and this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 characters, right? 7 characters long, so we should see 7 characters at the end here. Let's do node string my string dot length. Now notice the length of the string is never a valid index. Okay, so the index 0 is A, index 1 is B, index 2 is C, 3 D, 4 E, 5G and 5F and 6G. So the index 7, right, is actually too big. So the length of the string, that value you get back from length, is always one more than the highest indexed value. Okay, so it would never be a valid index number. It's always one more than the maximum index value. Right, and then we can verify that console.log using using this reference by index notation. We can say my string, and I want to reference the last item. Well, the last item is my string dot length minus 1. Right? So I can always find the last item in a collection, the last item in a string, by taking the length, subtracting 1 to get its index, and then using square brackets here to get reference by index. Right, so let's copy that, put it in quotes. Paste that. Right? So be sure you're typing all these things out, and you'll get faster and faster at these keyboard shortcuts. So let's run this. And so my string.length we know is 7. Right? So 7 minus 1 is 6. So G is index 6. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so you always get the last item with the length minus 1. That comes up all the time. Alright, that should do it for this video.